Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the first ever virtual Resolve. My name is George Tsiadis. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Resolution Project, and I'm so excited that you've decided to join us in this virtual format, whether you're catching this live or on the recording. We have a really wonderful panel scheduled for you today. Today's panel will be covering how large-scale private and public responses to a pandemic can sometimes provide inadequate relief to at-risk communities. Our panelists today will discuss how social enterprises can drive rapid and responsive local recovery efforts during a pandemic. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's panel, Aramark, as well as the panelists and moderator for sharing their expertise with us all. I encourage you to leave comments for the panelists in the chat section, and we'll do our best to respond live, time permitting. So with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Lior Ip. Lior Ip has served as the CEO of the Rodenberry Foundation since 2014, where he provides leadership and strategic direction for all foundation functions. And under Lior's direction, the foundation has launched several new initiatives, including a global grants program for early stage ideas, an annual activist fellowship, and a biennial competition for crowdsourced solutions. Prior to the Rodenberry Foundation, Lior co-founded Generation Teach and served as the CEO of Breakthrough Collaborative, a San Francisco-based educational nonprofit with programs in 24 cities across the US. Before joining Breakthrough, Lior was the global director for Ashoka's Youth Venture, where he guided program development, institutional partnerships, and regional staff in 12 countries. Prior to Ashoka, Lior co-founded and led an educational software company in New York City. Lior has a master's from American University and a master's in education from Harvard University's Graduate School of Education, where he was awarded the prestigious Leadership in Education Award. Lior is also a board member of the Resolution Project, has driven an incredible partnership that Resolution's been part of called the Plus One Global Fund, which I hope he'll talk about in greater detail as we go through, because it really is a bellwether for how philanthropy can participate. And Lior has actually been a thought partner for the organization since the earliest days, and I'm grateful to also call him a dear friend. So Lior, why don't you take us away?
Thank you, George. Appreciate that. I am joined today on this exciting panel with Vivian Tsang, who is in Vancouver, who's the founder and director of the Hope Initiative Foundation. So we're going to hear a little bit more about what she's doing. And we're joined by Alan Kendunga in Rwanda, who is the founder and CEO of Talent Match. Thank you both for joining us today on this panel. So let's jump in. We know that about $12 billion has been allocated to COVID-19 relief from foundations, corporate and private individuals just through the beginning of the year, which is a tremendous amount of funding in a relatively short amount of time. But we also know that about 80% of that funding has gone to large health organizations, and only about 5% of it is allocated to communities of color and vulnerable communities. So there's a lot of funding out there, but it is not being distributed particularly equally. And one could argue that it's not getting to the people who need it most. We know that there are vulnerable communities out there that are being affected disproportionately by the pandemic. And the role that social entrepreneurs have to play and are playing has been really an unbelievable sight. Certainly from our perspective as funders, what we've been able to see is social entrepreneurs pivoting or amplifying their work. They have the best understanding of what's happening in their communities, and oftentimes have the best solutions. And so today we're going to be discussing the role that social entrepreneurs are playing and can play with COVID-19 relief, particularly as the health component of this will eventually shift, and we'll be dealing with the secondary and tertiary impact of the pandemic as it applies to the economic, social, education, and other spheres as well. So I'd love to start with just asking each of you what the pandemic has meant for your work and your organization, and how you've adapted or pivoted in the last 7 or 8 months. So Alan, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about Talent Match, and then how the pandemic has affected your work and what you've been doing with your community.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Leo, for moderating this panel, and thanks for the resolution for having us. So Talent Match, just to give you a little bit of a background, is a social venture that's working with youth, mostly youth who are looking for employment, youth who are in schools and looking to learn hands-on experience from, companies through internship, frontier, and, entry level. So we're working with young people who are, right now are the most vulnerable, especially when the pandemic hit. A lot of young people either were laid off because most of them are volunteers, interns, and sometimes entry level, or the companies are not hiring. So young people are just redundant and they don't have things to do, and schools are closed, so they have no school going on as well. And so for us, the pandemic really hit us really hard because our trainings also stopped. We did not anticipate, I'm sure a lot of people, actually the whole world didn't anticipate that, in 2020 we will all be, staying at home, no school, no work, in the office. And so this was a hit for us, especially as a young venture that was just starting and we were just picking up. So we had to stop our trainings and kind of think about, okay, how are we going to now support young people who are not being hired, they are not in school, and there's no possibility of knowing what's going to happen next. So what we've been able to do is really shift our approach to skills development and also employment for young people, where we've gone digital, but we've also started to work with a lot of employers who accept virtual interns. So we're encouraging a lot of our network in terms of, hiring interns, getting entry level and volunteers to really go virtual and to support young people that way. Because we believe that as much as this pandemic is happening, it's also time for a lot of young people to get hands-on experience and skills. So that's one way we've been able to pivot. The other way we've been able to support young people, especially acknowledging that this is difficult for a lot of young people, we've been able to set up what we call pro bono services for young people and companies. Because a lot of SMEs, truth be told, it's not that they don't want to hire, they don't have resources to hire. There's no cash flow. They don't know what's going to happen to their cash flows the next year, the following year. So they are just putting everything on hold. So what we've proposed then is, how about we find you talent that's currently looking for something to do. We give you that talent and you don't have to worry about paying them. All you have to do is be open to have them. And of course that comes with being able to actually support young people to be able to take on such opportunities and to be able to volunteer their time and to work on projects. And that's where we've tried to get a lot of support in terms of how can we bring resources and support pro bono talent services, or what you would call talent credit, essentially, at least for a period of time. It's still very small because we don't have the resources that we need to be able to scale it and get a lot of SMEs to come to us for talent, but hopefully we'll be able to support more young people as more people get to know what we're trying to do and hopefully churn in. So yeah, but it's definitely been a roller coaster for us and a lot of other people as well. And I'm looking forward to hearing Vivian's experience.
Great, thank you. And this is what we were speaking about earlier, right? Is this an opportunity for small social entrepreneurs and organizations to leverage the resources they have, the infrastructure they have, the relationships of their community, to do things a little bit differently to meet the needs of the community and to address COVID-19. So Vivian, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing over the last 7 or 8 months and what the experience has been like for you as you've dealt with the pandemic in Vancouver.
Sure. So my venture is called the Hope Initiative. We're a group that works primarily with marginalized population groups and lower income households, very much in our own backyard in Vancouver, BC. There's huge disparity being in a city that's very expensive to live in. So we also do a lot of mentorship and outreach for youth as well. And we have a network of a couple thousand youth in the Lower Mainland that we serve. And so really with the, started with the pandemic with COVID-19, we had to pivot, and I utilized my time and also background as a medical student to gather kind of all my forces and all my classmates to help out. And so in mid-March, we were all pulled from our classes. And what happened was a group of 5 and 6 of us, we said, well, you know what, there's more that medical students and students in a variety of different professions can be doing during the pandemic, even though we're pulled from classes for safety reasons. So we then mobilized over 700 of our own students in the Vancouver, the UBC Medical School, to perform paraclinical activities. So we contacted public health, who at that time in BC didn't actually have enough capacity to hire staff to do all the contact tracing, to do the 811 hotline calls where people who were worried about COVID or worried about symptoms would be able to get help. And it was very easy to train medical students in the sense that we've already had exposure to some of these, types of symptoms and know how to deal with them from going on to our different rotations and from class. And so we really helped fill capacity in that manner. And we also created new initiatives. So for example, we had a prescription delivery system where we helped folks who are elderly or immunocompromised in our communities by dropping off and doing a contactless prescription delivery system so that they didn't have to go to their pharmacy and be exposed potentially to multiple contacts. And then over time, we also did the same with groceries as well for neighbors, or for example, for frontline worker families. So for example, some of our preceptors were working in the emergency and had already rented out their own condo for the period of months during the height of the pandemic, didn't want to actually expose themselves to their family members, but perhaps had small children or had elderly parents. And so really relied on medical students to help perform kind of daily errands and tasks and just check up on their families. And so we were able to fill capacity in a lot of those ways. And then slowly we mobilized 5 faculties in UBC, so thousands of students there, and then also touch base with schools in Western Canada. And so now we've expanded the COVID-19 med student response throughout Canada. We have a Western Canada and an Eastern Canada group, and then expanded to some contacts in the US and Australia as well. So very lucky to already have a network of students that we're working with to be able to leverage that in order to pivot really quickly and to mobilize the resources that we have in terms of people and human resources. And since, you're right that the funding doesn't trickle down to social enterprises as quickly as we hope.
So I think, a lot of people, particularly resolution fellows, social entrepreneurs are hearing you, and they're probably like me going, wow, that's incredible. Like, you mobilize so many people within large institutions. What was the secret to be able to do that? And I think there's probably a lot of interest amongst our audience in how do you engender so much action so quickly?
Yeah, it's a great question. Sometimes I, wonder what happened myself, but I think really now looking back, the key was quick delegation and specified roles. I think it's much easier for people to grasp what their job is and what the task is when you have defined roles for people and delegate very quickly in order to scale up. I also think that having groups that are somewhat homogenous is helpful, and giving them similar tasks, although it's maybe in a slightly different domain. So for example, prescription delivery versus grocery delivery, but very much similar tasks and similar steps. I also think it's now really important to develop protocols of how things are done, so people aren't reinventing every time. And then we actually built a mobilization toolkit for other faculties and for other schools, for other countries, to be able to have them very quickly replicate our model, so that they didn't have to start from scratch, and so that they can use something that was already tried and true and happening, And then they were also paired up with somebody from our team to be their contact person should they have questions, should they want to have some further discussion on ways that they can maybe pivot or tinker a little bit with our protocols to best fit their institution. But I think those components of having systematic ways of replication and of delegation is very important and was critical to our success, and especially in an acute pandemic situation.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And Alan, when you were sort of thinking and realizing what was happening and looking what the impact would be in Rwanda, what were the immediate sort of challenges and hurdles that you had to overcome, and what were the entry points that allowed you to be successful as you were thinking about the kind of pivots that you had to make?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge was that we were shocked. We were still in shock. I think though, like overcoming the shock and the fact that, life just suddenly was on hold was definitely, because nobody knew what the solution was going to be. So we didn't have anybody to go to and be like, what do we do? So we kind of had to sit and be like, okay, it's now time to move past the panic and think about something. So I think it took just sitting and thinking about, okay, what would be necessary and what is it that's in our control that we can actually control and that we can take action on. So when I realized that, yes, we don't have, a digital platform that we can do trainings on. Yes, we don't have, most of our young people that we were working with don't have internet connectivity wherever they are. The solution was, okay, what now? And so we had to think about something that was doable, and we were able to find, young talent, as I mentioned, that was already, out of work and out of school, and they have talent they can offer. And then there's these SMEs and startups that are struggling to have talent because they don't have money to hire or they have laid off people. And so there was an opportunity there. So we decided, okay, this is an opportunity that we can jump on and hopefully, both SMEs and also, young people will benefit from. But I think for us, what helped was mobilizing the resources that we had around us and realizing that there are things that are out of our control, but there are things that are in our control. And so we leveraged what we had control over. And what we didn't have control over, we just kind of put it aside and said, okay, we'll come back to you later. Right now, we can only focus on the things that we have control over. And I think mobilizing resources, which Vivian very much did fantastically, is one of the things that we really had to think about, is how do we now mobilize resources? We don't have money to pay young people for, pro bono services. Can we find a way, for companies to be able to maybe pay for internet, and this young person will be able to, offer their skill sets to work on a project. So we kind of had to look into resources that we had around us and people who were very much, who believe in what we're trying to do to jump on and support us. One of them is, the Rwandan Development Board, RDB, which has been very supportive in terms of, putting young people to work. And creating opportunities for young people to stay at work at the same time helping small, medium enterprises. I think so one of them is really mobilizing resources that we had around us and looking into our strength and also putting aside things we didn't have control over. Like we didn't have a control over the pandemic, so we couldn't sit and complain. We had to find something that we really had control over, and then we kind of moved with that. We're still in the process. The pandemic is not over, so we are still learning more ways and better ways to do this. So we are always also welcoming people to support us and to tell us what they think would be another approach that could be beneficial for what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think what both of you are speaking to is what I think makes social entrepreneurs so unique. It's creative problem solving. It's being comfortable in fluid situations. It's the ingenuity. It's the flexibility. but it's also resilience. And we should maybe spend a moment thinking about that, because there's a scenario where each of you and many other social entrepreneurs doing this work could have either said, this is too hard, or we're gonna just keep doing the same thing. And these are hard times. And so what is it about your work, and Vivian, I'll turn to you, that you think that, you know, instead of just saying, let's just keep doing the same thing, or in fact, let's close up shop for a little while, what pushed you to do the extra effort and to do what you needed to do? And as Alan pointed out, this is the beginning, right? This is, we're not even near the middle of this process yet. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what your thoughts are around the resiliency, both in terms of you and your organization, but also in terms of the communities that you're working with.
Yeah, great question. That's something that I've been putting a lot of thought into, is how to build resilience. And, you know, what is it about resilient people that are patterns that are recognizable? I think for myself, I've always believed in the capacity for change making in each individual, and that with some creative thought and, you know, divergent thinking, that this is possible regardless of the situation that you've been in. But for myself, I've personally been in situations that, and circumstances that were not pleasant, to describe them lightly, and have been encouraged by my mentors and by my community to then, you know, take action and think about something, even something small, that I could be doing to either help myself or to help other people around me. And I think it's those repeated experiences over time that have built resilience for myself. And then in the face of tougher situations, like in the face of this pandemic, then ask myself, well, I've done this in the past multiple times before. This is a very similar situation, just perhaps on a larger scale and with many more people involved. And, you know, how is this different other than the scale and other than the little nuances and what has changed? And I think for me, that's what built resilience for me, and what I hope to inspire in other people, and especially in youth that I work with. So what are your supports, and how can you, in times of, you know, unpleasant situations, identify ways that you can also pivot and think about additional steps that you can take, even if it's something just small, to help yourself overcome that situation.
And Alan, you remarked earlier that you were all in a state of shock when this happened. Was there a moment where you sort of said, "Well, we can't go on, and let's not think about a creative way of solving these issues," or was it pretty clear that you had to jump in and do whatever you could to help the work, you know, to move the work forward?
Yeah, I think the first week after lockdown, so we had this moment of, you know, kind of partial lockdowns, like everybody go home early, and then there was a total lockdown, you know, and that total lockdown, I think that's where the shock came in. I think it took me about a week or so to really have my head thinking, but I think what struck me and what really got me thinking was my team. I remember jumping on a Zoom call. It was just, we usually do like book reviews and book readings. We read books and then review them. So I said, okay, we have a book review and we cannot do it in person. What are we gonna do? So I said, you know what, everybody, let's jump on a Zoom call. Let's do this book review. So we did the book review. And when we did the book review, from that meeting, I think my team, and just looking at the support that we all had for each other, made me realize that, okay, there has to be more than me sitting in my bed and waking up and going to the fridge and doing the same thing all over again. So we decided, I think for me, that was like sticking together as a team was definitely one thing that drove me to think, what more can I do? And how do I keep my team busy was also another thing. And also listening to what my team had to say and what ideas they had in mind was really helpful for me to say, okay, this is not me alone thinking about this challenge that we're faced. This is the whole team thinking about how can we tackle this. So I think one way definitely that has helped us to stay stronger and to even pull through when things are difficult is my team. I have there's no I don't know how I would put that. So your team is absolutely, absolutely important. And it's important that you take care of each other, you take care of them as a leader, and you make sure that everybody is okay before you throw on the next challenge. And then sticking together, regardless of where we are and regardless of connectivity issues or whatever, we try to stick together, pick up a phone, do a group call, and make sure everybody is okay. That was one way we were able to stay resilient. And I think the other one is really realizing, again, like I said, things that we had control over. That helped us not to panic over things we don't have control over. So we continue to do things and to work on things that we could actually control. We continue to plan for things that we could execute on, and that helped us to be stronger and to stay, focused. Yeah.
I think the issue of teams is an important one. And if we expand a little bit to think about just the ecosystem that we're all operating in, right? We don't operate in a vacuum, and we have stakeholders that we work with. Vivian, can you tell us a little bit about what the experience has been like with either other funders, other resolution fellows, community members? What is the broader kind of constellation of folks that you work with? What does that experience look like, felt like? And how has that sort of benefited the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, so during the COVID pandemic, we had to reach out to a lot of stakeholders in order to plug our students into multiple outlets. I think we had over 60 institutions, let alone not even including individuals, contact us to get help with their projects, whatever it is they were doing. And I think a huge part of what we did in our team was then very quickly delegate project leads for each of the interactions, because there's only 6 of us on the core team. It would be impossible to field all of these, stakeholder requests and to be on meetings, for example. And so we very quickly, delegated to get a project lead for every institution that we were partnered with, and that they would, discuss the intricacies of how many students were needed, what the job description was, and they had a protocolized, itemized list of details that they needed to get, and then instructions on, what kinds of projects we would accept, and what kinds of projects would need to have further discussion, and when to escalate that to the core team, the steering committee, making those decisions, and then at what point do we need further advice, for example, from some of the physicians who were kind of back end supporting this initiative. And a lot of infectious disease docs would provide advice. For example, we had a request where students would be standing in front of hospitals doing screening, and we were told that this is actually very high risk for students, and especially we needed to have specific protocols in place and how to do that and how to keep people safe. And so I think those connections and the ways that we handled it was the key point to success in handling those interactions were these protocols where we made it very clear to students that were helping us and were part of our team, when do they need to then ask for help, and not to feel afraid doing that this is part of the role, and that we have a lot of back end folks that were able to be there for support and have much more information than we do as students, and to depend on them when needed. So I think that was what allowed us to engage with so many stakeholders at the same time, and help them out during the pandemic.
Ellen, how about you? You mentioned your immediate team, but when you think about the broader community, what did that engagement look like, and how important was it to engage various stakeholders in your community to achieve the success that you've had?
Yeah, I think for us, definitely the ecosystem, the entrepreneurship ecosystem, the startup ecosystem in Rwanda was very, very a huge part of, and it still is a huge part of what we're doing. And of course, education institutions as well, because they're stakeholders in making sure that, young people from different colleges are, engaged and they're working. But I think the biggest supporters have been the startup ecosystem in Rwanda, because they have been affected the most, and they are, have been the most resourceful in terms of actually supporting us and coming out and being vulnerable and saying, hey, we really are struggling to get this person, can you help us? And I think also the broader community, the resolution community has been very helpful. There's no day I try to reach someone at the resolution project and I don't get support or not hear back. And that for me is kind of, you know, this assurance that it's okay, times are tough, times are hard, but at least you have someone who sees you, believes in what you're doing, and they're here to support you any way they can. And that for that, I'm really, really grateful to the resolution community and the resolution project team. So I think overall, that's what has helped us, the startup ecosystem and also the support community through resolution.
So I think we're almost up at the end of our time. So I'd love to hear from each of you what recommendations or suggestions would you have for other folks who are doing similar work? Either any lessons learned or anything that you think it would be important to share with the audience that either has allowed you to be successful or something you would not want to do again that may have prevented you from being as successful as you'd like to be. Ellen, let's go back to you.
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing is get someone who believes in you. Of course, you have to believe in yourself first, but you really need people who believe in what you're doing and believe in the work and the impact that you're having, because those will be the people who will stick through for you when times get hard and times are tougher. And then be open-minded, really, like, you don't have to have answers to everything. There are times people come to me and they're like, you know, we need to do this. I'm like, I don't know. I really have no answers. So be honest with yourself, be honest with your community, with your team, be honest with your vision, what you're trying to do, and be open-minded to get support when necessary, and be there for others as well. It's not one man's island, so yeah.
Vivian, what do you think about any lessons learned or anything you would want to share with the group on why and how you've been successful, or anything that you wouldn't want to do, you would want to do differently or wouldn't want to do again?
Yeah, I think there's lots of takeaways from the projects and from other projects that I've done under the Hope umbrella. One of them is take stock of your skill sets, what you're good at, what you're not good at, and then be humble about that information. I think humility goes a long way as a leader, and especially as a leader of social enterprise and a leader of grassroots organizations that are just starting and that are in the kind of initial steps of formation. And find people, build teams that can supplement those weaknesses, because no one is good at everything. And I think it is very important for people to recognize the weaknesses that they have in themselves, and then to surround themselves with people that bolster the team and make kind of the overall organization stronger. And then I think that is really my main takeaway, and find people who are willing to also disagree with you. I think leaders are visionaries and have very strong ideas of what they believe in and what they think should get done. And I think it is really important to find teams and to build a culture where people are comfortable and where you invite people to disagree or to share new ideas that may be better, and to evaluate them on even playing field, whether they come from, you know, the new intern that you hired, or from the VP, or from the CEO. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you get good ideas and that you move forward with the best ideas.
I think the way you guys have approached this is what makes me really hopeful as a funder when I think about where the funds should go and how we allocate those. And I think it's obvious that the solutions, many of these solutions and problems are local, and that the only people who can solve them are people who are have the knowledge and the resources and the trust of those communities to be able to do that. So let me ask one final question. What does the next 6 to 12 months look like for you, and where do you hope to be, both as an organization and individually? You know, let's say a year from now, if we were having this conversation a year from now. Vivian, I'll come back to you.
Sure. Well, lots of possibilities there, and I like to, live my life with many doors open at the same time. But I would say, in terms of the organization, things are still moving. We're preparing for phase 2, and the, what might be happening in that. But then also on the kind of overarching umbrella of the Hope Initiative, we're moving forward with all of our mentorship programs. Obviously, things are going to be virtual and very different this year, but I think the intent should not be changing in terms of supporting young people and supporting marginalized communities. And then for myself, in a couple months, a year from now, I'll be graduating medical school, and so that's obviously very exciting. And I'm going to be tying in what I choose as my specialty with my social entrepreneurship and all the humanitarian work that I do. And I think that will take that to a new level and hopefully find niches that do require this expertise, which I'm very excited about.
Exciting.
Awesome. And Alan, what does the next 6 to 12 months look like for you?
Yeah, so I think for us, well, even though the pandemic was a really blocker and a terrible thing, it also allowed us to really think about what we want to do and kind of plan ahead. And so one of the things that we've actually done from the pandemic is pivoting and having a platform for our program. So we are working on that. Hopefully we can finalize it. It's under development. Then the other thing is we are rolling out our programs within one of the largest universities in Rwanda, the University of Rwanda, which is a huge, I think it's going to require a lot of work, but it's also really exciting for us because we've been waiting for this moment where we can actually have our programs on campuses. And finally, we have a partner who is the largest. They have 9 colleges across the country. So we kind of have to roll out in each of the universities, which is going to be a lot of work, but also exciting work. So I hope that the next couple of months will be filled with excitement and a lot of things to get done. Yeah.
Well, thank you both for participating in today's panel. It's very exciting to hear the work that you're doing and the positivity with which you're looking towards the next 6 to 12 months. So I'm excited to touch base again in a year and see where things are. George, let me turn it back to you for some final thoughts.
Great, thanks so much, Lior, and thank you, Alan and Vivian. The work you discussed is exactly the change we want and need to see happening right now. As an organization, we look forward to providing other Resolution Fellows with the resources, funding, and support to follow in your footsteps of making meaningful social change. Appearing now in the event chat is the link to support those future Resolution Fellows. You can also visit resolutionproject.org and donate through the button on the top right-hand corner of the site. If you're in a position to give, and we understand that many people are not right now, but if you are, perhaps you can consider a small but personally meaningful gift, perhaps the price of a usual Resolve ticket, which is between $100 and $250, or perhaps, if you feel like it and you feel so moved, a significant commitment of $3,000 to $5,000, the usual amount of a grant that launches a Resolution Fellow. With the world in crisis, we look towards the next generation of leaders and getting them started now. And your support today can help them get started and help us in the fights against COVID, climate change, social justice, and the crises ahead that we can't yet see. As you've heard from the panel, the leadership, creativity, resilience, and adaptability that Alan and Vivian have shown and exemplified in the face of crisis is exactly what we need to weather this storm and build a better society on the other side. So thank you all again for attending. Join us tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Time for a discussion on social justice and inequality in 2020, and on Wednesday for our interactive can't miss main event at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time with a special performance from Grammy-nominated musical guest and entrepreneur Ryan Leslie. RSV information can be found on our website or in the chat below. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.